Now, before you react emotionally to the title of this talk, 6 Signs of a Stupid Woman, I want you to stop just for a moment and ask yourself a serious question. Am I here to be offended, or am I here to learn something that might save me from unnecessary suffering? Because I'll tell you something hard, and I won't apologize for it. There are patterns of thinking and behavior in men and in women that are not just foolish, but dangerous, not only to the person who enacts them, but to the people around them, and even to the structure of society itself. And it's not compassionate to ignore those patterns. It's not progressive to excuse them. It's not empowerment to deny them. That's just cowardice. Moral cowardice dressed up in ideological clothing. So if you're brave enough to confront uncomfortable truths, not about others, but potentially about yourself, then stay with me, because I'm not here to insult you. I'm here to challenge you, to demand better from you. And if that offends you, good, that means you're still listening. Now, the first and perhaps most fundamental sign we're dealing with here is the refusal to take responsibility and the compulsive, reflexive habit of blaming others for the state of your life. That's not just a mistake. That's a philosophical error with profound psychological consequences. It's not just wrong, it's destructive. See, we live in a culture that increasingly teaches young people, especially women, that their problems are almost always someone else's fault. If you're unhappy, it must be because of oppressive systems, or toxic people, or childhood trauma, or institutional bias, or the fact that someone didn't validate your feelings at the exact moment you thought they should. Now, I'm not saying those things never matter. Of course they do. Terrible things happen to people, and some of that suffering is unjust and imposed. But here's the catch. You don't get better by pointing fingers. You don't get stronger by assigning blame. In fact, you become weaker. You become a slave to your environment, a product of whatever hurt you, with no agency, no self-respect, and no plan. And that's hell. It's not metaphorical hell. It's the real psychological kind, the kind that breeds bitterness, envy, resentment, and eventually hatred. When you abandon responsibility, what you're really doing is handing over your internal authority. You're saying, I don't have the power to change anything because I'm not the one causing the problem. And that belief is poisonous. It paralyzes you. You sit there waiting for the world to apologize, to change, to give you what you think you deserve. But the world doesn't care about your entitlement. It just keeps moving. Responsibility is the antidote to that paralysis. It's not a punishment, it's liberation. When you start to say, okay, maybe I contributed to this situation. Maybe I wasn't as honest or as careful or as committed as I should have been. Then you open a door, you crack the foundation of your chaos. That's when the possibility of growth begins. Now, here's the particularly painful part. If you're the type of person who always blames others, you will attract chaos. It's like a law of nature. You will surround yourself with unstable people because they'll validate your drama. You'll sabotage your relationships because it lets you remain the victim. And you'll create narratives where you're always innocent and everyone else is guilty. But deep down, you'll know it's not true. You'll feel it. That hollowness, that shame that creeps in when you're alone, that's the cost of lying to yourself. And let's be honest, that's what it is. A lie, a desperate attempt to protect a fragile ego that can't bear the weight of its own imperfection. But guess what? You are imperfect. So am I. So is everyone else. The mature path, the intelligent path, is to face that directly and do something about it, not hide behind excuses. Some people will say, well, I had a rough childhood, or people have mistreated me, and they use that to justify every bad decision they make for the next 20 years. But that's not healing. That's a story, and a very dangerous one. Because the longer you live inside that story, the harder it is to change the ending. Let me ask you something. What happens to a woman who constantly avoids responsibility, who blames every failure on sexism, or her parents or her friends or her boss or the toxic energy in the universe. I'll tell you what happens. She becomes shallow, she becomes resentful, she becomes emotionally fragile and intellectually lazy, and worst of all, she becomes incapable of love, real love, because love requires accountability. You can't build a meaningful relationship without owning your flaws. You can't raise healthy children if you're always blaming someone else for your problems. You can't lead or build or inspire or grow unless you learn to say the hardest words in the English language. This is my fault. Those words are sacred. They're the beginning of transformation. And any ideology or culture or friend group that discourages you from saying them is not your ally. It's your captor. It wants you weak. It wants you small. And it wants you dependent on rage instead of truth. So if you want to be free, truly free, start here. Stop blaming and start building. Because the moment you take responsibility is the moment your real life begins. Let's talk now about the second sign. And it's just as dangerous, if not more insidious. It's the inability or the outright refusal to sacrifice short-term gratification for long-term value. You see this everywhere. It's not just a problem, it's a pattern. And it ruins people. No world is full of distractions, shallow pleasures, empty attention, instant validation. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your whole life chasing them. You'll trade your future for momentary relief, and you won't even notice it's happening. Because every individual decision, every late night out when you should have been working, every impulsive relationship you knew would go nowhere, every dollar spent to impress someone who doesn't care, seems small in isolation, but they add up, they compound, and eventually they form a life that's built on sand. And here's the thing, you know when you're doing it. That little voice inside you, the one that whispers, this isn't right. You're wasting your time. You're better than this. But we learn to ignore it. We distract ourselves. We tell ourselves, I deserve this, or everyone else is doing it, or there's plenty of time. But time doesn't care about your excuses. Time is brutal. Time is indifferent. And the years you spend in distraction are years you never get back. Now, some people will say, well, I just want to live in the moment. And that sounds profound, but most of the time, it's just rationalized hedonism. It's not mindfulness, it's avoidance. Because living in the moment, if it's done properly, is actually very demanding. It requires presence, responsibility, discipline. It's not numbing yourself with Netflix and cheap dopamine hits. The intelligent woman, the wise woman, understands this. She knows that meaningful things take time. She knows that building a career or a strong body or a stable relationship or a purpose-driven life demands the willingness to endure discomfort now for the sake of something better later. But the foolish woman, the one we're warning about, doesn't care about that, or rather, she pretends she doesn't. She'll say things like, I just want to have fun. Or, I'm young, I'm allowed to make mistakes. And yes, you are. But what kind of mistakes? Repeating the same toxic patterns for years isn't learning. It's self-sabotage dressed up as freedom. And freedom without structure is chaos. It's not liberation, it's decay. One of the hardest truths to swallow is that your future is being shaped by your present habits. Every time you choose distraction over discipline, you reinforce a neural pathway that says, I can't handle reality, so I'll escape it. And the longer you practice that, the harder it becomes to stop. Eventually, you're not just indulging in temporary pleasures, you're addicted to them. Addicted to being wanted but not respected. Addicted to comfort without contribution. Addicted to attention instead of achievement. And this kind of life doesn't age well because youth has a way of masking foolishness. You can get away with a lot when you're 25, but at 35, 40, it starts to show. The consequences of your choices catch up. The things you neglected, your skills, your character, your relationships. They don't magically appear later. They deteriorate in silence. And then you're left asking, what happened to me? That you know, deep down, you always knew. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy your life. Of course you should. But enjoyment without direction is hollow. It's not joy. It's sedation. And sedation doesn't build anything. It just numbs the pain of knowing you could have done more. So what's the solution? Well, it's brutally simple, but not easy. You have to learn to say no. No to the party, no to the impulse, no to the people who pull you toward chaos, and yes, a deeper, more difficult yes, to the things that hurt now but pay off later. The book you don't want to read, the project that overwhelms you, the silence you're afraid to sit with, the conversations you avoid because they're uncomfortable but necessary. Delayed gratification is not a restriction, it's a strategy. It's a form of wisdom that says, I am aiming at something greater than my current feeling. And people who live that way, with vision, with discipline, with restraint, they're the ones who build lives that are worth living. So you have to ask yourself, are you willing to pay the price now so that your future self doesn't have to live in regret? Because if you keep trading what matters for what's easy, you'll wake up one day in a life that feels like a joke, and the punchline will be your own choices. Let's move on to something that's uncomfortable for many to hear, but absolutely essential if we're going to have an honest conversation about competence, self-worth, and the way women navigate the world. And that's this. If you build your entire identity around your appearance, you're building your life on a decaying asset. That's not cruel. That's biological reality. Beauty fades, no matter how genetically gifted you are. Time does not care. Gravity doesn't negotiate. And the culture that once rewarded you for being pretty, for being noticed, for being adorned, will turn on you the moment it finds someone younger to give that attention to. Because it was never about you. It was about the image of you, the surface. Now, I'm not saying beauty is meaningless. It's not. Beauty is a powerful force. It has evolutionary and social value. It opens doors. People respond to it. It carries weight. But if that's all you're bringing to the table, if that's your currency, your identity, your leverage, then you're in a very vulnerable position. Because what happens when it fades? What's left? Who are you without it? And more importantly, who have you become while you had it? There's something tragic about a woman who never invested in her mind, her moral character, her skills, her discipline, because she never had to. The world bent around her looks. She was given opportunities without effort. She was praised without substance. She was allowed to bypass the difficult process of developing herself because her appearance earned her shortcuts. And that sounds like a blessing, but it's not. It's a trap. Because eventually the game changes. Life starts to demand more from you. Relationships require emotional maturity. Work requires competence. Children, if you have them, need guidance and structure. Your partner will need more than a pretty face. He'll need trust, insight, respect, depth. And if you've spent years ignoring those dimensions of yourself, what are you offering? What are you contributing? A smart woman understands this. She cultivates the traits that last. She educates herself, not just formally, but spiritually and psychologically. She learns to listen. She reads. She learns to sit with discomfort. She builds something inside her that time cannot take away. And that becomes her foundation, not the reflection in the mirror, but the integrity in her character. I know one of the things that strikes me most in today's culture is how aggressively young women are taught to obsess over how they look and how little they're taught to think critically or speak with precision or develop a resilient inner life. The message is be desirable, be liked, be flawless. And of course, that sells billions of dollars in cosmetics and filters and surgeries, but no one tells you that if all you become is desirable, then you'll spend your life terrified of being replaced because someone will be younger, someone will be prettier. It's inevitable. And if your self-worth is rooted in comparison, you will never feel peace. It doesn't matter how many compliments you collect or followers you gain. You'll live in anxiety. You'll measure your value by the attention you receive, which is the most volatile and soul-crushing metric you could possibly use. But competence, now that's something else. That's real. That's earned. That's untouchable. When you develop competence, you become useful. And when you're useful, you're needed. You're respected. You walk into a room with quiet confidence, not because you hope to be admired, but because you know what you're capable of. That's power, and it's attractive. Not in a superficial way, but in a lasting way. A woman who is wise, sharp, disciplined, she holds the room differently. She doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't manipulate with appearance. She simply is solid, grounded, clear. That kind of presence doesn't fade. It grows. Now, some people will hear this and say, well, can't I be both beautiful and competent? Of course you can. That's not the point. The point is where you put your identity. Where do you root your value? Because if your beauty is just another aspect of you, something you honor but don't depend on, then it can be a gift instead of a burden. But if it's all you are, then the clock is ticking and eventually it stops. So ask yourself honestly, am I cultivating a self that will endure, or am I just trying to maintain a version of myself that will inevitably disappear? But real power doesn't sound like that. Real strength isn't noisy. It doesn't need to be. Because when you actually know what you're talking about, when your words are grounded in reality, in experience, in truth, then you don't have to scream. People listen, not because they're afraid, but because they trust you've got something worth hearing. You know, the woman who thinks she has to be loud to be taken seriously has already conceded something crucial, that her ideas on their own aren't enough. So instead of deepening her thinking, she amplifies her tone. She confuses intimidation with influence. And while she might get attention, what she doesn't get is respect. Because respect doesn't come from volume, it comes from coherence, from making sense in a world that's lost the ability to distinguish noise from wisdom. Look, speaking with conviction isn't the problem. You should speak with conviction, you should speak clearly, precisely, truthfully, but clarity is not the same as force, and confidence is not the same as combativeness. What's really happening in many cases is emotional reactivity, a lack of internal structure, a weak foundation masked by theatrical defiance. Because if you dig just a little below the surface, you often find uncertainty, confusion, pain, not principle. And that's the tragedy, because that energy could be directed toward real growth. It could be used to build insight, not just arguments. Now, here's something you need to understand about influence, especially in relationships, workplaces, families, the domains where most of life actually unfolds. People don't respond well to coercion. They might comply in the moment. They might stay silent, but deep down, they're retreating. They're calculating how to avoid you, how to disengage from you, how to outlast your emotion without being pulled into it. So if your power comes from your ability to dominate a room emotionally, you're not leading, you're exhausting people, you're replacing dialogue with drama. And the cost of that over time is immense. You lose allies, you isolate yourself. You begin to believe that being feared is the same thing as being respected, but it's not. One builds connection, the other breeds distance. And worse, you start to mistake performative outrage for moral clarity. You think you're fighting for something important, but what you're really doing is fighting to feel important. That's not integrity, that's ego. Inflated and fragile. And when the high wears off, you're left empty, because no real transformation came out of it. Just noise, just heat, no light. The strongest people, the ones who truly shape culture, who guide others, who become the kind of people others look to in crisis, they don't need to posture. They don't throw fits. They don't try to win arguments through sheer intensity. They speak calmly, and people listen, because their authority is earned. It comes from competence, from composure, from depth. A truly powerful woman is dangerous, but not because she yells. She's dangerous because she's precise, because she's thought through what she believes, because she's capable of standing still when the room is in chaos, because she's mastered herself before trying to influence anyone else. That kind of woman can change a family, a business, a community, not by overpowering it, but by grounding it. But that kind of strength takes discipline, it takes humility, it takes knowing that you're not always right and being willing to refine your thinking, not just reinforce it with more noise. It takes letting go of the need to always win and instead asking, what's true here? What's actually helpful? What's sustainable? Because anyone can be loud. That's easy, especially when you've been hurt or dismissed or overlooked. There's real pain behind a lot of that noise, and I'm not diminishing it. But pain, if it isn't examined and transformed, becomes a weapon often pointed at the very people who might have helped you heal. So here's the challenge. Don't confuse your volume with your value. Don't mistake aggression for clarity. Don't build your identity around the ability to silence others. Build it around the ability to articulate something real, something that stands even when everything else falls. Because when your voice is rooted in truth, it never has to shout to be heard. Now, if there's one thing that can quietly, persistently, and almost invisibly corrode a woman's life from the inside out, it's this: the tendency to surround herself with chaos and then call it love or loyalty or excitement. You see this all the time. Women drawn to drama like moths to a flame. They call it passion, they call it chemistry, they call it intensity. But what it really is, more often than not, is unresolved trauma, unexamined wounds driving self-destructive choices. And instead of confronting those patterns, they keep repeating them. Same arguments, same toxic relationships, same roller coaster, just different names, different faces. There's something deeply seductive about chaos. It has energy. It feels alive, especially if you grew up around instability. If unpredictability was your normal, then stability can feel boring. Calmness can feel empty. A man who's grounded, responsible, consistent, he doesn't spark anything in you because your nervous system has been trained to equate danger with desire. And that's tragic, because it means that something inside you is wired to seek out the very thing that will harm you and push away the very thing that might heal you. You become addicted to emotional volatility, not because it's good for you, but because it's familiar. And that's how the cycle begins. You tell yourself, he just has a temper, or we fight because we're passionate, or it's complicated, when what it really is dysfunction. But instead of walking away, you double down. You try to fix him. You make excuses. You sacrifice your peace for the thrill of being needed. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. If you're always the woman in the middle of some mess, always fighting, crying, cleaning up someone else's mistakes, holding together a broken situation with your bare hands, then maybe the chaos isn't just around you. Maybe it's in you. Maybe you've internalized the belief that your worth is tied to how much pain you can endure. And where did you learn that? Probably from a culture that romanticizes suffering, that tells women they're strong because they stay through dysfunction, that glamorizes the idea of the ride or die, the one who sticks it out no matter how much it costs her. But strength isn't staying in chaos. Strength is knowing when to walk away from it and doing so without apology. Because peace isn't passive. It's not a lack of passion. It's not giving up. Peace is the result of alignment. When your actions match your values, when your environment reflects your growth, when you stop trying to prove your worth through pain and start protecting your soul instead. And look, I'm not saying avoid every challenge or that discomfort means something's wrong. Life is difficult. Relationships do require work. But there's a difference between growth and self-destruction. One makes you wiser, the other makes you smaller. You have to start recognizing the patterns. Do you always choose chaos because it makes you feel important? Do you confuse emotional highs and lows with depth? Are you afraid of stability because it forces you to sit still and face yourself without distraction? These aren't easy questions, but if you don't ask them, life will ask them for you. Through burnout, breakdowns, lost years, and broken bonds. And the worst part is that by the time many people wake up, they've already normalized dysfunction so completely that peace feels foreign, safety feels suspicious. And that's when you realize the damage isn't just external, it's internal. You've built a life around the very thing you were supposed to escape. The woman who lives in chaos, emotional, relational, financial, often tells herself she's just trying to help or giving people chances or being real. But what she's really doing is avoiding herself. Because facing yourself requires silence. It requires structure. And it requires admitting that some of your choices, some of your instincts are not virtuous. They're familiar. Familiar doesn't mean healthy. And if you want to grow, truly grow, you have to stop treating your emotional instincts as gospel. Not every feeling is true, not every desire is wise, and not every storm is meant to be danced in. Some are meant to be walked away from. You become the architect of your life by choosing what you tolerate. And if you keep tolerating chaos, don't be surprised when your life keeps burning to the ground. Because if you can't live without chaos, then chaos will become your identity. And one day you'll forget who you were before the fire. There's a kind of woman, and you'll recognize her if you've paid attention, who refuses to take responsibility for anything that goes wrong in her life. Every failure, every broken relationship, every missed opportunity, every bout of bitterness or chaos is always someone else's fault. Her boss is unfair. Her ex was a narcissist. Her friends betrayed her. Her family didn't support her. The world is out to get her. And she actually believes it. That's the dangerous part. She's so convinced of her own victimhood that she never once stops to ask, what part of this did I create? What did I allow? Where was I blind, prideful, lazy, or reactive? There's a kind of moral satisfaction in blame. It allows you to feel right without doing the hard work of becoming better. It lets you keep your story, your drama intact. It feeds the ego. And when you surround yourself with people who are just as wounded and just as unwilling to grow, they'll validate it. They'll say, you're amazing, it's them. And now you've got a support group for stagnation. You've built a circle around your unwillingness to evolve. But the truth, and this is the truth that will either make you or break you, is that your life is largely a reflection of your choices. Not entirely, of course not. Some people start with more, some face horrors they never deserved. But even so, even then, what you do with what happens to you, that's on you. That's where your power is. And if you abandon that responsibility, you abandon your power. You might win sympathy, but you'll never build strength. Because sympathy doesn't transform you. It just lets you stay broken a little more comfortably. Now, responsibility doesn't mean self-blame. It's not about taking on guilt for everything that's happened in your life. It's about owning your role. It's about saying, maybe I didn't start this fire, but I've been throwing gasoline on it for years. It's about confronting the hard truth that you are often both the victim and the saboteur in your own story. When you realize that, you face a fork in the road. You can keep going the easy way, the way of excuses, deflection, projection, or you can stop and say, enough. I'm going to become someone who doesn't just react. I'm going to choose who I am and take full ownership of what that costs. That's not just maturity, that's salvation. That's how people change.